order. I'd like to welcome our guests this evening. We'll go ahead and start out with Steve, to deliver the fiscal year financial audit to us.
Good evening. It's the moment we've all been waiting for. No, it always feels good to have another bound audit report done and just kind of be able to put the previous year to rest, even though, as we know, when we go through our state school fund 101, that the previous year really didn't put to rest until we get to mid-May because the state school fund adjustments that ODE does from the previous year. But anyway, I just wanted to walk you through this. Last year we had our auditor Kenny Allen here with us, and we thought it was especially important last year as we had a couple of new Gatsby requirements, specifically centered around the net pension liability with the PERS piece on the government-wide statement. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think you all have your statements, right? So I wanted to actually go right to the back page, the final page first, which is kind of where the rubber meets the road, page 63. Basically, this is just a nice one-page checklist summary, basically, of the results of our audit. And the most important part about the audit is that first word you see there, type of audit report issued. Again, this is on page 63. Unmodified, and it's kind of a weird word. They used to call it unqualified, and that's the word you want. Basically, that means it's a clean audit opinion, no modifications suggested. Everything, as you go through the rest of the list, you can see there were no material weaknesses identified, no significant deficiencies, no areas of non-compliance. Everything was good with their testing, and these were just for the financial statements covering all funds, but in addition to the audit they do as required by the state of Oregon, they also have to do an audit for the federal awards for the grant dollars. And so we do have, they have to test a major program in detail, in further detail every year. And this year they picked the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disability and Education Act. So it's the federal dollars we get, supplemental dollars we get for special education students. It usually is IDEA, Title I, or the food service. So next year they'll switch to something else, but you can see at the bottom that the federal award audit also, there were no material weaknesses identified, and everything passed that, the requirements that the feds put out. So when we submit the audit report, we're required to submit the full audit report to the Oregon Department of Education, which we've done, as well as the Federal Audit Clearinghouse in Jeffersonville, Indiana, which is for the federal audit piece, and then also to the Secretary of State and RESD. So that's all been done. So this page is always a good one to just go to and say, hey, you know, how was our audit? How was the testing? And it was a positive report. The next real great piece of positive news is if you go to pages 37 and 38, you'll see the detailed financial report specifically for the general fund in some detail. It looks somewhat similar to what you see each month for the general fund financial report, the regular board meetings that we go over each month. So page 37 specifically covers all of our revenue items, which again looks exactly the way you see it each month. And then on page 38, the expenditures by instructional expenditures and support services expenditures. So you can see that when you get to the third to the last line, our net change in fund balance was just over a positive $1.3 million. So that represents how much more in revenue than we brought in than what we expended. And our beginning fund balance at July 1st, 2015 was just under $3.9 million. So our audited general fund ending fund balance came in at $5,187,000, $187,838. So just under $5.2 million. Back in August, I had projected we'd be right around $5 million or slightly above, and that's where we came up. So that's an increase of about $1.3 million, and we're now sitting at the board goal of 15% of our general fund operating expenditures. That's great, especially as we look to the 17-19 biennium. We are halfway through our current year, which will probably be the last year in a while that we will be able to build our reserves. So hopefully by the time we get to the end of this year, June 30th, hopefully we'll be closer to $6 million in our ending fund balance than $5 million. And as we know, as we head into the 17-19 biennium and beyond with the purge rate increases and other pressures and unfunded mandates, there's a good possibility we're going to have to start tapping into those reserves starting in the 17-18 fiscal year. But we're just getting into those discussions. That'll be right at the top of our list over the next few months with what's going on in the legislature. Unfortunately, as you probably heard, the co-chair's budget came in below the governor's budget, which has never happened, and that was a little discouraging, but we'll see what happens. So that's the general fund picture. Just to kind of take you through the report itself.
The good news, though, is the revenue to the state's much higher.
Yeah.
Just how they're choosing to spend it.
Exactly. Yeah. So they carve up the pie. So just to kind of go through a real brief summary of from the beginning to the end, I've highlighted a couple of the key pages already, but at the beginning in Roman numerals 1 through 8, that's the management discussion and analysis, which is a requirement from Gatsby of the district's statements or summary of the financial statements, and that's something that's been done for 6 or 7 years now, I believe. Pages 7 and 7A is a good page to look at for a schematic view of all of our funds, general fund and all of our grants funds and capital project funds. It basically includes everything, all of our funds except for Fund 700, which is where the two charter schools have their money, but they have their own separate audits. So that's a good page to look at as well. And then pages 14 through 34 is a very detailed review of it's the notes to the basic financial statements, and this follows the same format that you've seen in previous years, and it's laid out by the auditors, and it goes through what all of our funds, defines our funds and what belongs in those funds, and breaks down our fixed assets, our long-term debt, the PERS piece, and property tax receivables, grants, all sorts of items. So it's a good read. I know it gets a little more in depth. So there's two things. One, just in terms of the audit on page 18, you probably would notice, and it was also laid out in your letter. That was an insert to your statements, a letter to the governing body, specifically from the auditors to you. We did have expenditures in the grants fund, specifically in instruction, that were overexpended by $86,000, and also in capital projects fund support services that were overexpended by $115,000. In the grants fund, the original 15-16 budget did not include budget dollars for the collaboration grant. It was not known that that grant was going to be received at the time the budget was put together. So we did do a supplemental budget to appropriate those awards, but we also received more grant money in other areas, so we did end up a little bit over there. The capital projects fund, we actually had way more appropriated than we actually spent. But because it fell in the area of support services, you remember when we do the adoptive resolution during the budget process, you budget by fund and function. So while we had plenty appropriated in Fund 400, it was just all in the function series 4,000 and not in support services. And we did have some in support services where really I probably could have classed that into the 4,000 series. So it ended up being a footnote on the statement. The other thing that really needs to be focused on, and this is what Kenny talked about a lot last year, was the Gatsby 68 requirement regarding the reporting of the pension liability related to PERS that every governing body has to now report on the government-wide financial statement. And there's some narrative in this section, pages 14 through 34. But if you turn back to specifically the page 5, start with page 4. This is our government-wide statement of net position, which includes all of our capital assets, land, and buildings, and other assets, as well as all of our liabilities on a government-wide basis. And you can see that our net position is after it's all said and done, it's a positive $1.1 million. Well, if you turn to page 5, you can see at this time last year, we were sitting at a positive $8.1 million. That decrease of $7 million has everything to do with the PERS liability and the poor performance that the current actuarial valuation in the PERS program is based on, and which is, of course, why the rates will be going up on July 1st, 2017, which we've known for quite some time. And I know when Kenny was sitting here a year ago, he warned us that we already knew these numbers would look this way. In fact, there are some government entities that already have a negative net position because of this. We do not, but it's still heading in the wrong direction because of that. So, other than that, there was one other insert that I think is really helpful to look at, just from a more detailed basis. And this is another requirement. There's many submission requirements by ODE, but the pages that look like this is an insert. It was not bound in. It's not required to be bound in. These are revenue and expense reports that are done separately that actually drill down not just to the fund and function level, but also to the object level. So the first page is revenue for all funds, but then every page thereafter is an expenditure report for every fund by fund and function. So it gives you a little bit more detail than what you would normally see on a monthly basis in terms of how the expenditures break out by fund and function and object. And the object level, basically, we know that the function level breaks out in direct instructional services versus support services. Specifically in the general fund, but the object level breaks down. The object 100 is salary and wages. The object 200 are employee benefits, which includes the employer paid taxes, PERS, insurance benefits. Object 300 are purchase services. Object 400 is stuff, supplies, and computer software, hardware, etc., books. 500 is capital outlay, and object 600 is other. Dues and fees, insurance premiums, things like that. So these pages are nice to look at every once in a while, just to get a reminder of how it all kind of gets laid out, and it all aligns with the state chart of accounts. So all 198 school districts have to code their expenses the same way. So anyway, that's the last page I wanted to point out was page 58. That is getting back to the federal side. I always think this is very helpful to look at as well. Page 58 is the CFA, which stands for Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. So this schedule specifically shows you all of the funds that come to us from the federal government. Now, most of those funds don't come directly to us from the federal government. They come through ODE as well, but they have a federal origination point, if you will, federal roots. So you can see that we bring in just over $2 million. We expended just over $2 million in federal grants this year. Major players again being Title I-A, the IDEA special education supplemental grant, and also then from the U.S. Department of Agriculture for our food service program. And then there's some other small grants as well, like Title II-A, Title III ELL. So this is a nice reminder that while majority of our budget is state revenue and local property taxes and the state school fund general grant, we do also get quite a bit of resource from the federal government. Now, all these funds would flow through the Fund 200, which is the grants and instruction fund. They all have separate sub-areas, so we can keep track of them separately, but they roll up to the Fund 200. So. Anyway, those are all my the kind of key highlights, and hopefully you've had a chance to look through a little bit, and definitely be able to hopefully answer some questions that you might have, and even if you don't have any, or if you have more later, be happy to be available to answer any questions you have on an ongoing basis as well.
Any questions for Steve?
No, nice reports.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the work you do,
Thank you.
understanding all these little details.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
It's nice to see the healthy and fund balance, because that's what saved us for a lot of further headaches the last time we were hitting this first wall.
It's going to make a difference over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
All right, to Andy, the draft school calendars.
Yeah, I actually, your station tonight are copies for draft calendar copies, and these are truly in draft form and for the 17-18 school year. And this is about the time that we begin putting these in front of you for your consideration. You take action on a calendar. Generally, at the February meeting, you've taken it at the March meeting in the past a time or two. But I think the sooner you can agree upon a calendar for the next school year, the better. Denise and I were just discussing that we already have parents asking us for particular dates in the 17-18 school year, as recently as this week. So, or last week, excuse me. I did give you two options for consideration. So we haven't discussed a pre-Labor Day option for the last few years, but I put it there for a reference point for you, and I also put it there because you have had some consideration, or not consideration, you've taken action to make up inclement weather days, closure days this year, and I know as a discussion point that has been a reference in the past that when you do when school districts administer a pre-Labor Day start, they generally get out, as you'll see here, around the first week of June as compared to a post-Labor Day start, which is the middle of June. Again, I know there are implications with that, and you surely are welcome to discuss them here this evening, but I want these to be in front of you, just get your input now, and to get this in front of you and let you know that this will be a topic of conversation at your February regular session, and possible consideration during that meeting as well, depending on what you say here this evening. So any questions that might be best just to respond?
I know there have been some districts in the area that had started school before Labor Day. Do you know which ones now have went?
And Woodburn does regularly. Yeah.
We experienced that when we were living on the East Coast a few years back. They did a pre-Labor Day start. It always seemed a little strange to me because I'd never experienced that, growing up, or even compared to kids when they were younger. It did work, it seemed like, but it just seemed a little strange that you started in August. I know this is a small consideration. I mean, we're talking a week here, but I don't know. It's my feeling. I think this is purely from a weather standpoint. Usually June can be iffy. I would rather have vacation in August myself because of the weather than get out June, is it 7th or 8th? Lord knows summer may not start till 4th of July here. So, I don't know, that's kind of my opinion on it. I'd rather have it all in August and kind of make that clean break in Labor Day than get out earlier in June.
Well, most times when it seems to make some sense to start before Labor Day is when Labor Day falls a little bit later in the month. It looks like it's on the 2nd this year, so.
One of the things I had somebody talked about, apparently they had a split family, and they have some of the children are in this district and some of the children are in the other district, and they were having kind of a hard time with that because, their district gets out, I think, 3 days or a week or something earlier than ours did, so I was, what we could do about that, and obviously there's, it's not a me decision, but, so are one of these more current or more in line with what some of the other districts do, or?
Yeah, I think, I haven't specifically asked other districts, but we can tell you that we compare our district to the Willamette ESD district every year, and the post-Labor Day calendar is the one adopted by the Willamette ESD board generally year after year. So you align with them, and there's some intent to that. because we acquire so many services, especially around special education from Willamette ESD, that it's important that we align it as much as possible. So if we did go to pre-Labor Day start model, it would work. It would just take a little extra effort for Willamette ESD to have their staff available for us. It's very possible, because they're operated by a collective bargaining agreement, they're classified and licensed employees, that if they don't begin their employment year at the same time as we do, that there could be 2 or 3 or more days where we would not have services, and we would just have to provide those ourselves. Then the flip side of that is that, we may have more flexibility with other times of the year to make that up. I don't know, because we've never done it before. That's to answer your question, Todd. Willamette ESD, Salem Kaiser, I know for certain, with certainty Mount Angel, they look to us, and so a lot of school districts do look to each other to follow a very similar model.
Also seems like we don't have any problems with the run over Christmas break this year, we have those 2 days at the beginning this year. So to me, I don't know, it doesn't seem like one favors having a 2 full week block there, right? Either one of these will work to keep that 2-week block, which we didn't have this year, which we did hear some opinions on that.
Sure.
So.
And is there, it seems like we're getting a longer calendar into June, going a little bit longer into June now. Is that because of state requirements for seat time? Do we have less flexibility now than we used to have?
There are no increased requirements for seat time or instructional time from the Department of Education, but there are requirements specific to how those instructional hours are measured.
Right.
Okay, so with that said, we are also obligated to maintain the elements of the collective bargaining agreement with the License Association, which maximizes the contract days to 192 days and then 193 for our new teachers. We also have some parameters within the collective bargaining agreement about number of in-service days, number of grading days, how those days are used. So this calendar, just to answer your question, is no longer than really what we've experienced for a number of years. It meets all of the requirements that we have to maintain based upon the CBA and based upon the state instructional hour requirements. But as an example, you could do whatever you want. You could say you only want to have 1 week of vacation, winter break, and you can shorten your school year a week if you want to do that. You can have 3 days for spring break instead of 5. And those are not necessarily always realistic options, but that's the kind of flexibility and latitude that you have because that's within your control.
Looks like Danny's in favor of that. She's ready to go.
It'd be easy to have a 1-week Christmas break next year, because when Christmas falls over.
You would. I actually was looking at that.
It'd be very easy. I'm not advocating that, I'm just throwing it out there. I think people are more used to starting after Labor Day, and people are really used to getting out around the 14th or 15th of June.
Yeah,
That's the way we've done it. I would like to, I don't support a pre-Labor Day start.
I would favor pre-Labor Day if Labor Day is later in the month.
Yeah.
But I don't think this warrants it.
Or if it had impact on the 2-week time in December or spring break, but I don't think either one. It's kind of semantics, the way we start here or start there, it doesn't really have an impact on that, so.
Okay.
If we have snow days and we get a little later, well, that's just the way it goes. So.
Well, and this schedule would allow a similar flexibility as you provided this year by being able to exchange some professional development time for instructional hours, which now just makes sense instead of just adding on.
There's one thing I wanted to point out is that if we had another weird winter like we're having this winter, and we lose more days out of first semester, we might want to have kind of a back pocket contingency plan on what it would look like to adjust the semester and start times, because already your first semester is 6 days shorter than your second semester. And that becomes a problem at the high school level when you are in semester classes and trying to teach content. If you ended up with another 5 days, first semester gone, now you're at 79 days of instruction.
Are there any other questions or comments on this?
So Wally,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll say the next step is, now that you've reviewed this, I will eliminate the pre-Labor Day option, because it sounds like there's no support for that. And I'll share this draft with both associations, so they'll get it out to teachers and classified staff, get some input. And unless I hear any other direction from you, I'll ask you to discuss it again at your next meeting and consider it draft.
All right, very good, thanks, Andy.
You could do the one-way Christmas break and throw it out and just have your phone light up for a day.
It's not funny.
That's a charity laugh, Jim.
All right, Jennifer. There it is.
What's your phone number? Call
Yeah.
Wally.
Forward those right on.
Thanks for sending the report out ahead of time, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've obviously heard quite a bit about standards-based grading, and I know you have too. So I tried to capture in the report that I sent to you kind of a summary of what I'm hearing, and hopefully I captured all of the things that you're hearing too in a summary, but if I didn't, of course, we can talk about that tonight. So just kind of going through where we've been, we probably don't need to do that unless you guys have questions about that. And where we are, great. Okay.
Did everybody have a chance to read this?
Okay, wonderful. So, let's get to what's working. Let's start with I think we've had a steady shift in thinking from what we're doing to what we're learning, which is in line with our teacher evaluation and supervision system and what we're trying to do, just good teaching across the board. I think there's been a good shift for students to what we learn instead of what we earn. The point system is about earning points, and the standards-based system is about learning the standards. So I think there's been some good shift there. I think that the current standard-based reports that we're issuing give parents and students and teachers good feedback on what specifically, it's not just I'm getting this in math, it's quadratic equations and linear equations and fractions, and I mean, it really lays out for people what level of mastery we have in each standard. But clearly there are some things that are not working. The biggest thing I think that I'm hearing is the inconsistency with which we report. So we have obviously different schools and different teachers and different departments within schools that are doing this a little bit differently. So it becomes very challenging for students, parents, counselors, AG advisors to navigate what those reports that they're getting mean. We also have, some with percentages and some with letter grades and some with 1 to 5 scale, and some are factoring behavior components in and some are not. So the inconsistency in itself is problematic. It doesn't allow our parents and our support staff to have good conversations with kids about where they are, what they need to do to fix where they are or address where they are, and hold kids accountable. That's an important part in our district is having our parents on board to help us hold kids accountable and help us get kids where they need to go. And if parents can't navigate the reporting system, then that's a problem for us. So that we need to clean up. There are multiple calculation formulas which are part of that. And then there is the perception that some calculation formulas that we're using are negatively impacting Silver Falls School District kids. And where that's coming from is we have at least one proficiency-based practice in place. So that regardless of the percentage that a student earns, they need to have demonstrated a minimum level of proficiency in all of the standards. So because that is not in place in other districts, there is some perception that because you're here, then you would get a lower grade than if you were anywhere else. And that becomes significant when we're looking at scholarships, free tuition programs, admissions to college, those kinds of things. So that I think we want to address. And then I already addressed the lack of uniformity. So that's kind of what's not working. Have you guys heard other things or do you have questions about that part?
I was gonna ask, I think it was a few meetings back, Kevin Palmer was talking about
Right.
doing some different stuff.
Right.
How's that gonna work with this? Because that seemed like it was a little out of the box.
Yeah. So what he was really speaking to was that he, in his middle school, is not issuing letter grades. So some middle schools are and some aren't. And it makes sense for some to issue, like at Silverton Middle School, they change classes at semester. So they're kind of tied into issuing a letter grade at the end of the semester because they may have a different teacher or even a different course next semester. But in K-8 land, where they have the same teacher, the same course all the way through, they don't necessarily have to issue a letter grade. So I think that can be cleaned up for parents, teachers, and kids if we have a standardized conversion scale where it's a clear, if you end up with this number or this percentage, it's this letter grade. Does that make sense?
Are we keeping them all on the same standards-based, standard, if that makes sense? So like, if somebody's at Deep Creek versus somebody at some middle school. what do
Are
you
they teaching
grade?
the same standards?
Yeah, are the
Yes.
standards, as long as the minimum standards and they're all there?
Yes.
I mean, I know semantics here, and I get that, because the different teaching model, one's like you said, one model's high school, one model's a little different, K format.
Mhm.
And my concern is as long as they're getting those standards based, they're meeting those standards or exceeding those standards, I think that's what's most important.
Right.
Well, you need to understand it though, and that's a lot of the complaints I was receiving, is parents didn't necessarily understand how each child was doing at this particular point in time. They get it on the number scale, they may get a low number towards the beginning of the year, which, as far as proficiency of that subject, yeah, that makes sense.
That's okay.
But how do you know if your child's doing okay or not? It's very difficult to understand that.
And it's different
That's-
teacher to teacher. So some teachers will do, here's the proficiency level that they're supposed to get to at the end of the year. So they are going to start the year with like 1s and 2s, and theoretically we want them to get up to the 4 and 5 level by the end of the year. But all the way through the year, they're at what we would consider DNF.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But that's
So
not-
parents go, whoa, you're grounded for the whole school year.
Right.
The
That
other-
happened.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
So the other thing that becomes problematic there is when students transfer out.
Yeah.
And then we print their report to go with, and we're transferring honors level students with these maps. So, and then in the same building, maybe the teacher next door says, well, I assess one standard at a time. So you get assessed one standard at a time, and so then that DNF thing doesn't show up for them, but they could be in the same building. So when we print a standards report for a student, it's a little all over. That's a valid complaint from parents, that it's inconsistent.
So we need some standardization of their standards, is what we're saying.
Yeah, we have the standardization in the standards. So the report cards K-8 look exactly the same. So we know which standards are programmed into the grade book, so each grade level and each subject, what standards they're teaching to and what standards they're assessing. What our problem is how we're calculating and reporting them. That's all over the map. So in terms of teaching and assessing, we're okay. It's really about what the grade book does with it and how we report it out.
So it sounds like long-term plan is over to middle school, we just like K-8, 6-8s. At least we have some type of rubric to come up with the same result. Would that be true? So I think it's really important that Silverton Middle School is no different than our 6-8 at the outline schools.
I think as long as we have a conversion chart that says an A there is this number range here, or this number range here translates into an A here, that we're okay. Like if a parent or any one of us could look at a report from whether it's Butte Creek or Silverton Middle School, if it says 4.5, we know that's an A, because we have a district chart that everyone follows.
But in terms of proficiency, what if it's a 2 after your first semester, or 3
Yeah.
maybe?
It is that bad.
Yeah, that may be an A at that
Right.
time of year.
That's a calculation we have to clean up, yeah.
Okay.
And so we have that's really two different models of doing it. We're grading on where you should be at the end of the semester, or we're grading at where you should be right now.
Yeah.
So I think we need to back everybody up for the sake of consistency, and we know what we're looking at, we know where we are right now. I mean, we're sending current status reports for our kids out, which don't really reflect what their current status is, unless you know how to read it. And I would argue that the teachers that run it that way are great about explaining that to parents. But the parent pushback on that is, okay, but if I have 2 kids in this building that do it 2 different ways and with 3 different teachers, and I have 2 kids at the high school that each have 7 different teachers, now I have 17, grading scales that I'm supposed to understand and navigate, I can't help you. Like, the parents are saying, help me, help me.
So the question I've gotten a couple times, why did everybody just go back to the letter grades?
To the letter grades.
I mean, everybody seems to understand that, we all had it, and we kind of received it. It
Well, the
keeps
high
everybody on
school
same
is
level.
really tied to letter grades because we have to do GPAs, transcripts, that has to run that way. The middle schools, I mean, up through grade 8, there's really no need for that. But I think because Silverton Middle School is changing classes, that became an easier model for them. I think as long as there's a clear delineation of what each of those numbers means, a letter grade, that will be okay.
That's provided to parents when they get the progress report.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the K-5 land has always worked this way. So the K-5 teachers don't keep a grade book and keep track of assignments in it. That doesn't happen. They, when it's time to do a progress report or a report card, they say, do you know that this is like, what letter is this? What sound does it make? Can you blend these two letters together? They're just really measuring the standards and reporting the standards. So what this is asking middle school and high school teachers to do is essentially the same thing, except we have to report it in a letter grade for a GPA for a transcript. So that's where it gets a little tricky because there's lots of different ways to do that. And some of our ways are working maybe smoother than others.
And when we first implemented this, we were told we'd have best of both worlds. We'd have more information for parents, which I thought was great.
Yeah,
But I don't think we're there yet.
you're right, yeah. There's the potential to have more information for parents. It's just we've muddied the waters enough with having enough different models that parents don't really know what they're looking at. And now we're sending reports home that say 4.6 in this subject, C, 4.6 in this subject, B, 4.6 in this subject, D. I mean, there's no consistency to the scale because of the way that it's calculating in the software, really. So where I think we need to go is to say, here's the framework that everybody's going to build their standards in. And this is how it's going to calculate, and this is what the district conversion scale. Anybody that needs to convert to a letter grade, this is what it looks like.
And also you said, going back to calibrating everybody, taking a snapshot of where they're at now and rating them, not where they should be at the end of the year. Because
Right.
that's going to probably clear up a lot too.
A lot.
That's going to clear up a lot.
And there's arguments to do that both ways. And it's more of a proficiency model to do it that way. To say this is what proficiency looks like and by June we want them to be proficient. But proficiency is a different system than standards. So where we've run into two of our big issues are in K-8 land where we've run that model. And at the high school where we have to have a minimum level of proficiency in each standard in order to earn the grade that we get by percentage. Does that make sense? That was a mouthful.
Or maybe you could, or maybe that could be something that for high school, we kind of do this, and then for everything under, we do it different. Because really, I mean, I don't know, could we do that? Could we have?
That'd get messy.
That would get messy, but maybe you have to accommodate the nature of high school. I'm talking out loud. Because, you know, like, K through 8, you're getting people ready for high school.
Right.
You're making sure that they have the baseline understanding, the standards, the proficiencies, to get them ready for high school. Because again, that's the transcript that goes with them.
Right.
Well, part of that is giving them letter grades so they're ready, so they understand that as they go to high school.
True.
It's very important.
I understand that point too, but I think the biggest thing is we have to instill the skill set
Yeah.
up to that point, because come ninth grade, that's per se when, kind of the,
Rubber hits the road.
that's where it hits the road.
Permanent record.
That's where that's on the permanent record,
Right.
Nobody looks at the 8th grade and behind.
The middle school is kind of a practice for.
Right,
for-
but I understand your point, exactly. You
Yeah.
start, I remember getting to middle school, even summer middle school, you're starting to change classes, you got a locker, you're getting ready, it's that transition.
So what's your goals then for getting this all cleaned up? Do you have a timeline?
Yes, I do. That's on page 3 of your handout. So we've backed off on some of those proficiency models, currently, the ones that are going on permanent transcript. Hopefully does everybody understand what that one is? Are you getting enough feedback on that, or do you need more explanation of what that looks like?
I'm hearing not a lot of comments. Why don't you go and explain it?
Okay, I'm gonna use the whiteboard, because that's easiest. So for standards-based grading, in the grade book, you would have standards and different subject areas, maybe assess different number of standards in the semester. And then you have assignments or assessments that are put in the standards. So, I mean, a good number is 3, but there might be 2 and there might be 8 assignments that would be in the standard. Then for each standard, the kid gets a grade, and that might be, for some departments, it's a letter, for some departments, it's a percentage, and for some departments, it's a number, based on which scale they're using, right? So let's go with the number, because that's the one that we're getting the feedback on. So it might be for each of these standards. Okay, so you get a score for each standard. Then they average these and you get a number. So that might be, don't check my math, but let's say it's a 4. And let's say that a 4 on the grading scale is a B. Now there's an extra layer here though that says, in order to earn a B, you may have no 3s, 2s, or 1s. So even though the percentage for this is a B, because there's a 2, your grade is actually a D. Does that make sense? So that's a valid proficiency model, but it's causing some issues when it converts into a percentage and a letter grade. Does that make sense?
Isn't that like artificially dig them down? They've got a 2 or a 1, even though their average is out to a 4.
Well, that's the feedback we're getting.
Let's look at the whole, not the one thing, right, you know?
I feel like I need a secret decoder ring there.
I know.
Well, yeah, your
Read the report
explanation
card.
makes sense, but the concept doesn't.
I know, so in the first year that we did this, there I think were a lot of questions about what does that mean, how does that work? Like I don't understand it. Now I think people understand it, but there's more of a, is that where we really want to go with that? So,
So, real quick too, I want to verify I understand. So are you saying that within the high school, each department has their own system of
yeah.
tabulation or calculation? So within our own high school, we're somewhat rogue.
Yeah, but I'll clarify there, Ron, that has not been the exception in the past. I mean, departments have operated differently using just a traditional standard percentage grading system. That's been going on for years. In this case, I think because we're looking for the uniformity, and especially in the core content classes where we're finding some disparity, and because it's confusing, it's beginning to get legs of question and concern.
Sure, and I can see how this really takes our students and puts them on an unequal playing field versus other school districts.
Potentially, that's
So
right.
like Jennifer, when she said, hey, they're trying to compete for scholarships and grants and get a place at a major university, and we're the only one playing with these rules, that's a serious disadvantage. That needs to be addressed.
And whereas they would be proficient at what they're doing, because they're not getting the score per se, they're not getting the scholarship or the extra love, so to speak, that other districts would be. But our kids in essence master the skill set better.
Right.
They just
So that's
start
the
showing it
pushback
on
from the
paper.
teachers. And they, their intent is to make sure that if we're saying the student in this class earned a B, then what they want to be saying is that they mastered all of the standards at a B level. And so to say that they got a B when they got really what would be a D in a couple of standards feels artificial to them. It also allows teachers to help keep students focused on you must learn every standard, not some of the standards. You must learn all the standards. So there's, it does. It's just,
It's on balance.
it's a tough one.
We can't be unique.
No, and I think that's a pretty significant portion of this, Wally, I've heard a few of you say it now, when we're talking about a system of competition towards scholarships and placement at university levels and free access to tuition, free tuition. It's problematic. We're discovering some problems, that's for certain.
I mean, this just seems too important to experiment with, looking at kids getting into college. That's just my opinion on it.
I was told that COSA is recommending that the system, the standards-based grading be scrapped. Is that true?
Not necessarily. It's House Bill 2220, the recommendation was to scrap that. So not standards-based grading, but reporting. This really, I mean, standards-based teaching is good teaching. So the way that we're doing the instruction in the classroom and assessing students and holding them to standards and talking about what are you learning instead of what are you earning, that's all good stuff. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater there. This is really about how you calculate it and how it turns into a letter grade on a transcript.
That's what we got to do.
That's kind of what I'm hearing here.
Yeah. So what we're thinking is we could standardize everybody, middle, high school, with some kind of framework like this. The flexibility for departments could be here. So currently, different departments do this differently. Our English department does mode. Our math department takes the highest, so which is a proficiency model kind of hidden in here, right? So this is they start a standard and they don't do very well on it, so they maybe are getting 1s, 2s here, but by the time they finish, maybe a week in or 2 weeks in on this standard, they're up to 4s or 5s. So they take where they ended up, not where they started, for the math department, and that makes sense for them. The English department does a few attempts at it, and where did they most frequently fall? So they do the mode here. I think if we could at least standardize that we're clearly listing all of our standards, and we're going to do an average of the standards, and we're all going to run it on the same scale, that would clean up 90% of it.
And the report card and the progress reports show consistency
Right.
as far as what's reported.
Right, right. This is where departments could have some flexibility though. In what should this look like for your department, your subject level, your grade?
You mean mode or
Do you average this? Do
Yeah.
you take the mode? Do you take the mean? Do you take the highest?
because when you said, what was the method of, they start usually low and then at the end, usually they're doing
Yeah.
really well?
Yeah.
Isn't that truly measuring their progress in the standard?
Yes, this is so interesting that you say this.
Yeah.
That is a debate, kind of department by department. What is the most accurate reflection of what a student knows and can do? So the math department would say, if over a 2-week period they learned it at this level, then this is the accurate reflection of what they can do, so that's what they drop here.
Shows
Right.
progress. Right.
Yes. But others are, okay, there's an accountability issue in the classroom to an extent of, so do we then blow off all of this and just do this and then get the same
Yeah.
grade as everybody
I was
else?
gonna bring that up. Behavior is a real issue
Yeah,
because there's a lot of students out there figuring out the system. And they don't do their daily work because they know nobody's gonna care.
the math department experimented with that, Phil would be better one to
About
speak to that.
3 years
3 years
ago, yeah.
Where they said, okay, nothing counts except where you just end up. How'd that go?
It didn't go well.
It didn't go well.
In the real world, you have stuff to do. You need to learn how
Yeah.
to work within that.
That's true.
So I mean, we have exceptional teachers who know what it looks like in their classroom in front of kids. They know like what they need to get from kids, and they know what the most accurate reflection of what a kid was able to perform on any given standard. So I'm good personally with letting them determine what that should look like in their classroom or department, as long as parents and kids and AG advisors and counselors and support staff know what it says. And we don't have parents trying to understand and navigate multiple systems. And then, of course, those few systems, some in the middle school with that proficiency towards the end of the year, so you have an F all the way through until May, or this formulation, you know, that's, in the big picture, probably not where we are yet. That's a that is a valid practice, and there's reasons they're doing it, but it's not a clean transfer from proficiency to a letter grade with a GPA. When they started down this road, in House Bill 2220, the thinking was that higher ed was going to go to a proficiency model. Like instead of having a GPA, you would have to demonstrate competencies. And there are some cool systems out there for that, like the badging system. Like you demonstrate a skill, you get a badge for that. And so you have a transcript of badges. It's good stuff. It's just not where we ended up going. So, you know, the higher ed kind of drives our truck here.
So I was gonna think about doing it, they said, nah, forget it.
Same thing happened with Sim and Cam years ago.
Yeah.
They were all gonna do this and nobody did.
Yeah,
In theory, it might be a better way to do it, in theory.
it's reinventing the wheel. though.
Yeah, it's, trying to overhaul an entire education system to read that language, though, is a whole other thing.
Well, and I think it creates a lot of confusion with the students. If they've got 5s and 4s and they get a 3, they don't understand why they got such a bad grade because the average, like you said, should be higher than that. So then I think they lose confidence and it just spirals downhill from there.
And Jennifer,
That has been some feedback we've gotten from parents and counselors, yes.
and just in my opinion, the average thing, if they have 5, 5, 5 and a 2, and then so they end up with a D instead of a B because of the 2, that averaging isn't a whole lot different than the system I grew up in, with the 80%. Because like in a math class, say you might be lousy at fractions and flunk the fraction part, but get everything else. But then so you end up with a B in the class, where in fractions you got an F, but the fractions wasn't a big enough percentage to pull the rest of the stuff down. So,
You can't do algebra.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
still be proficient in algebra.
so it might not be so bad to average it out unless they have to be totally proficient in every standard, but that's, I don't know.
There's
I
some
know that's
places
the
you have to
goal.
do this, like EMT training, you want them to have at least 4s all the way, right? If you're
Uh-huh.
looking for an EMT.
Yeah,
You have
Oh,
to
yeah,
master all, you have to
yeah.
have all of that with proficiency. But the question really that we're hearing now is that appropriate for 100% of our kids in a high school? For teenagers, 100% of them in this model, does that work? And is that fair to our kids? It's at least not consistent, so we need to address it.
yeah, it just needs to be, I think it needs to be consistent.
Well, and then on top of it, it needs to be equal to other school districts, so we're not special.
We like to be special, but.
I like the fact that we're special, that we kind of, I think, we ask for high standards, right?
Well, that's great, but an A here has to somewhat equal an A somewhere else.
I agree. We can set ourselves apart, yet still be consistent.
Yeah.
What are other districts doing? Did a lot of districts stick with the standards-based?
Some
grading?
did, and some went back. Once House Bill 2220 was revised into House Bill 4150, many districts did just go back.
Uh-huh.
And some districts proceeded with standards, but not with proficiency. So actually, this example that I gave you is from Beaverton. This is what Beaverton School District runs, and they run it K-12. Same
Oh, I see.
grading scale for everybody, K-12. So you can read, and if you are in a grade level that you have to convert to a letter grade, that's how you do it.
By the way,
Everybody.
when I worked up there, I had parents complain to me all the time, say, don't let your school district do this.
Go
This
to
is awful.
standards?
Yeah.
Well, and look at how much, and they're consistent with these. It's, anytime you try to change something, it's tricky. There's growing pains. There's an education part that you have to know what you're looking at and be able to translate it into your schema, right? What you experienced and what you understand. We at least can do that. We at least can standardize it.
One thing you didn't address, I was going through my notes here. I had feedback that students with IEPs, they get 1s because they aren't hitting they're never going to be proficient or hit the standard. I guess is the right word. And they don't show any growth because of that. Has that been looked at? And because hopefully they're growing, that's what we really care about at that point. If a child isn't capable of learning the standard, we at least want to see some growth. And is there a way to measure that?
There is, but not on the same standard scale that we use here. So students who have an IEP and special education have their own standards that are written into their IEP. And those standards get evaluated yearly, and we show their progress towards those standards and their growth in that way. But can that translate into this system? Not necessarily.
So is it just evaluated annually then? There's no
Their
progress
IEPs.
throughout the year?
If you
So
were
that's-
to run, where did they land on that, Phil?
We had some discussions at that point, and I think we're still in the middle of some of those, is what's the best way to meet the needs. We have tried to, in various buildings, assign standards where they're operating at that point. we run into the legal need to report the grade level that they're at and then also report where they're actually working. So that's, in some of our buildings, we had them assigned to 2 different courses. So.
So Wally, the reality in my mind related to that is just think of the name, the Individualized Education Plan. It's an individual plan with progress goals for each student and growth as measured based upon the goals and the progress of those goals for each student. It's not necessarily, and frankly, has never fit very well into a school-wide grading system. So we've always struggled with this a little bit. In this case, since we're talking now about, let's pick 8th grade standards, and we have an IEP student who happens to be in the 8th grade, but operating at 4th grade standards, is it entirely fair at all to be able to modify a grade or show in a grade book that that student received a 3 or a 4 or an A or a B, when truly that child's operating at a 4th grade level? And the report for the child's IEP is really the federally protected document that we have to rely upon. So if we can come up with a way to express a grade based upon some creative solution, that'll be great. But we've also been working on that a long time, regardless of whatever grading system we're using.
The feedback I got was parents didn't understand, they had no data to go off of.
So the data would be, I mean, all of those goals are tracked in their IEP, but they're quite different than this. Remember, a standards report tells you what the student can do and what they know based on each standard. So if you have a 7th grader who really, because of a learning disability, is reading at the level of a 3rd grader, if you give them a 7th grade report card that reflects those standards, it's not going to look good.
Right, so maybe in that situation, we ought to scrap this all together and they just be evaluated differently.
That's a discussion we're having.
And entered. So once I get all of Victor Point set up, then I have to now go do the exact same thing with Butte Creek for every grade level, every standard, every subject. And then as we've done work to modify those standards and get those narrowed down to what our true priority standards are, each time a teacher requests a change, I have to now go into the back end and then change it in multiple places to get that done. So as we've done work, we've had changes. The big one that we had this year was removing the semesters. In the past, we've been built on semesters at the elementary, and this year we're looking at how do you do from September all the way through June. So those kinds of
Is that K-5 or?
That's it's K-8,
So that's
except
a
for the
problem.
middle school.
So that's a problem then.
For,
Because our 6-8s within our K-8 building should operate the same as the middle school. It should be evaluated the exact same way.
so that would be, looking at discussions.
If we do that, it'll all be the exact same way.
Okay.
I mean, or, no, and I'm gonna say, I mean, on my timeline, it's getting some input and then putting together a district committee to fill in the specifics of that. Because how many standards, right? One of the fears of the department who runs this is if you don't hold kids accountable at that level for each standard, then they're going to blow off some standards. Well, you control that with the number of standards that you're averaging out, right? So a kid can't blow off a standard without it impacting their grade. So we need to have some discussions about how many standards, what are your options in the middle there, and then what is the percentage, the number and the percentage and the grade that go together. What's the conversion chart? So while I think that's a solid framework that other districts are using successfully, we have some work to do in filling it in.
We have a lot of work to do in 6 months.
What?
Yeah, in order to hit your timeline.
Yeah, so in terms of getting parent, teacher, and student feedback, I did want to ask you if there are specific questions you would like included in that. Is there I know you guys are getting feedback, so are there specific questions that you want us to ask so that we get the right stuff?
One I would have is if you have transfers either in or out, how are the other districts going to, what's the metric going to be used to convert from one to the other?
The big one is knowing how your child's doing at a specific time. It sounds like you're addressing that. So maybe when we make these changes, shouldn't be an issue. But
Well, that's the hope, but we didn't intend to create the issue.
Okay.
Right? So
Have we done a
we
basic,
tried to do it right the first time, but
have we done, part of my naivete here, have we done a basic, do you understand the grading system? Check yes or no for our parents. Just because it could, if no, with some reasons, that might drill down, and maybe we're trying to make it complicated, but just, do you understand it? You know, and that's not compromising somebody's intelligence here. That's just saying, do you understand
We
this?
don't understand it.
There's a lot of.
I have one person contact, used to be a teacher in this district, she ended up staying home with their kids. And she was a very good teacher, and they don't have a clue
Yeah.
where their kids are.
That might reveal a lot right there.
I have some questions. If we're concerned about them reaching their proficiency, why are we letting them get 2s or 3s and not making sure that they go get up to the, at least?
Can you reteach
Yeah,
the
can you
two section?
Because if they're failing a section and they don't understand how to subtract, why are we gonna let them get a 2 and not move on and teach them how to multiply?
This is another benefit of running this calculation system, honestly. This is, I mean, there's some benefits to this second layer because it catches the standards they didn't meet.
Right.
I mean, it holds them accountable for that. So when you take that away, the fear of the department that's running this is, well, then we're saying they got it and they didn't get it, right? So how do you measure that and make sure you capture that without having a system that can penalize kids differently than other districts are? I mean, we need to have both.
Yeah.
We have to find a way to hold kids accountable to learn all of the standards, but in a way that is consistent with who they're competing with.
Well, I think another thing, the other thing I've heard, you kind of addressed it, but if they aren't meeting the standard, why not? What do they need to go work on? And that's not really understood either.
That's the biggest part. Well, that's what RIE is for.
Right. There isn't always time to go back and reteach every section.
Any other
Yes.
comments?
So remember that this has been a work in progress for many years. And so when we roll out standards-based grading, right, we roll out RIE so that we can identify kids who didn't meet this standard get requested for RIE that week to re-teach and reassess that standard. But that model didn't work like it was supposed to.
And then what about the middle school?
Middle school has different systems in place, but honestly, you have really different models of middle school running all over the district, and that, some of that can't be
True.
fixed. But, so every school has to have a way to say, you didn't meet that standard, what are we going to do to do it?
So you need an RA type approach to go back and address the issues.
Intervention programs, I mean, that's good teaching, that's been around
Yeah.
forever.
It comes to the teachers too.
Yeah, are you catching it, and then what are you doing to fix
I mean,
it?
we had a severe intervention with my son last year, and he's like a different kid this year because of it, you know, in his math. He was bawling. We had a fabulous teacher, give him kudos, Casey Murphy, who just, hey, to my wife and I, we need to do something there, right? So unfortunately, sometimes it comes
I
back.
have a niece that had a similar situation in the earlier grades, but
Yeah.
she was having some severe issues and identified it and they took
Well,
care of
yeah,
it.
and like I said, my son, talking about proficiency and standards, he's a different kid this year in his math. I mean, it's just because of that intervention, right? And but it comes back to the teacher calling us out. And do they have the time?
But they need the time to do it.
Hard to do.
That's a different issue at the high school.
Exactly. Absolutely, absolutely.
Much different issue.
Very
So
true.
different departments have to address intervention for their standards different ways. There used to be a universal format to do that in with RIE. Like everybody in the math department who didn't get a 3 or higher in quadratic equations gets requested for RIE on Thursday. They're staying at school that extra 2 hours. They're getting a reteach and a reassess, and that's how they would clean that up. Okay, but that system didn't work like it was designed to work really effectively. It did in some departments, it didn't in all departments. So now each department has to figure out how to do that on their own. I believe the math department now is doing that in Math Lab, is that correct?
Yes.
The English department, you know, has been able to catch it right there. So when we take that away, that's gonna create an issue for them. So that's probably not.
Any other questions? Appreciate the work you're doing. Could you come back later in the school
No,
year?
this is
And
it.
give us-
Yeah, we'll keep working on it.
Okay, maybe come back in May or June.
See where we
or
got.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're doing a really good job, Jennifer.
You got tough
Yeah.
problems.
Thanks, Herb.
Well, it's like a dog trying to catch its tail. You fix the problem, you create another problem, and you just keep this endless circle of.
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah, pretty much. Wow.
I appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Chair, if I could just comment one more thing to that, I think just as takeaways here, and since we have a number of members of the audience as well, I think it's important to remember that through Jennifer's leadership and frankly what we've done over the last few years, I think we've developed some very good systems and efforts towards standards-based grading, which in and of itself, I think has incredible value. But the reporting piece, that's the talking point that I think is most significant here. The reporting piece is creating some concerns, some confusion, there's questions of uniformity, and that's really what we have to work on. I just want to be certain before we leave here today that we've got a lot of good things going on. We have some problems, we're assessing it, we have people who are on it, we're reporting it to you, we're making the public aware of it, you're seeking input, we're responding to it. I think that's also a valuable talking point I'm asking you to take away from tonight too.
Thanks, Andy.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks. Oh,
Any other business tonight?
I do want to ask
Okay.
the board if we have sections C and D, all the revisions for section C and D from the policy work that Wally and Ron and the administrators have been working on. Do you want to have those, about that thick, for your February regular session? Are you ready for a first reading on those? You remember you had sections A and B at your last session, and there was very little conversation. I think you were generally pleased with that, but it's just a lot of reading, and you go through 3 readings before you do a final approval. So we'll get them to you. If you don't do it in February, then I'm going to ask that you do it in March, because it is a goal of yours to get as many of the sections of your policy manual revised this year.
There's going to be another bunch coming right behind it.
Correct. Yeah, the committee's been doing a great
Supposed to
job.
take a year and a half.
Slow down, Walt.
You decided to take longer than a year.
Well, we're going to slow, actually, we are going to slow down when we start contract negotiations. We're probably going to.
Oh, that's true.
So I can give them to you. You'll have a couple out. Denise will actually get them to you later this week somehow, because they are thick. She'll probably have to put them in a box and mail them to you, or ask you to stop by and pick them up. And then you'll have a little extra time before your February regular session to
Dandy can
Say I could drive.
Oh, Dandy can deliver.
What do you guys want to do it in February?
I think so.
Okay.
I recommend it.
All right, going.
Keep it going.
Yes.
Okay, any further business? All right, seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.